Many high-profile smart city projects have missed the mark, not because the technology didn't work, but because the process left people behind. When innovation is driven from the top down without meaningful partnerships or community engagement, even the most ambitious plans can stall. That's why a new model is emerging, one grounded in collaboration, transparency, and the idea that urban innovation should create value not just for investors, but for entrepreneurs, neighborhoods, and the public at large. In Detroit, Bedrock is helping lead that shift. Today's guest, Kevin Mull, is at the center of that work. As Senior Director of Urban Strategy and Innovation at Bedrock and co-founder of the Urban Tech Exchange and the Detroit Smart Parking Lab, Kevin is creating spaces, both physical and institutional, where startups can test new ideas, city stakeholders can weigh in, and new technologies can grow in ways that are practical, inclusive, and aligned with local goals. With a background that spans business development at Bosch USA and leadership in electric vehicle and cloud services, Kevin brings deep experience in bridging public-private efforts to make impact in cities that are ready to do things differently. I'm Kate Gasparo, and this is Building Better Cities. If I've never met Kevin Mull before, how do you introduce yourself these days to new acquaintances?
Yeah. So I guess from a professional perspective, I've had a very long career in the automotive industry, and I recently made a pretty big pivot career-wise after many years as a mobility guy. Now I'm more on the infrastructure side, and that creates some great context for what I'm doing now because I'm looking at some of the same problems through a different lens from a different perspective. It's also been a great learning curve, kind of revitalized me in my career because I'm very excited to be doing what I'm doing and getting to do that full time, especially as the resident of the city and is directly impacted and can directly see the results of some of the work that we're doing.
Bedrock is an interesting place to land for a mobility guy because Bedrock, as a real estate and urban development firm, is mostly focused on the built environment and how stable it is. So buildings as stocks as opposed to cars and mobility as flows. You play this interesting role of not just bridging mobility and real estate, but also bridging entrepreneurs and innovation and real estate. And that's unique for Bedrock as an urban development company. How does Bedrock create the rationale for that? Because they have invested in the Smart Parking Lab in Detroit, as well as the Urban Technology Exchange. I'm curious how you're sort of vocalizing that through line of real estate and innovation.
Yeah, it's sometimes not as clear as I would like it to be. But I think it starts with innovation, and it's in Bedrock's DNA to be an innovator in its core day-to-day work. The addition of me onto the team in my role is maybe orienting it in a little bit of a different direction, but still in ways that help Bedrock go about its mission as a real estate company and a city builder. It also helps because the work that we're doing with startups and entrepreneurs and innovation, these are the types of people and organizations that we want to come into the city and be our tenants as well. So we're kind of playing two different games at the same time where they will intersect in the outcomes where we eventually have an improved city and we have improved assets and we have people that want to work and thrive in our portfolio.
And when we first started working together and the creation of the Detroit Smart Parking Lab, this was really Bedrock's first foray into this space. We had a very clear vision of what that would be. And I would love for you to let everyone know what that was at its inception and how it evolved and led to the Urban Technology Exchange.
Yeah, that's a really fun history that I love to share because it started with an idea. I was at Bosch at the time, and there was this new parking technology, which was equally dependent on a car company to deploy the tech on the vehicle and an infrastructure provider to deploy tech in the built environment. Without both, this solution was going nowhere. We were able to get Bedrock and Ford Motor Company to join together. We did the pilot, this really breakthrough automated parking technology, and it was a big success. The real takeaway was the magic that happened between those three different entities innovating together, 1+1+1=10 kind of a thing. We all agreed that to further legitimize our idea for a parking lab that would extend on that initial concept, we needed to get a public element to the relationship. We approached the state of Michigan and its Office of Future Mobility and Electrification. They said they wanted to join the mission, and the four of us launched the parking lab. It was really easy to see very meaningful outcomes from that, to the point where Bosch and Bedrock also had interest in topics related to the built environment, primarily property tech, as we call it. We thought we can take this model that we're proving already to be successful in the Detroit Smart Parking Lab and apply it more towards that built environment. We approached new partners, Cisco and Code Labs, to be founding sponsors of the Urban Tech Exchange, both of which having the same mission, where we're working with breakthrough technology providers, largely startups, essentially a non-dilutive investment in them, giving them a space and some tailwind, whether it be grant funding or sponsor funding, to deploy their technology in a quick and safe way, but still in a real environment. Sometimes for startups, that's what they need as much or more than they need capital. They need a place to tell their story. And through the Smart Parking Lab and the Urban Tech Exchange, we provide that place to demonstrate solutions and engage the broader ecosystem.
I think that's really cool because you think of the built environment or the architecture, engineering, construction spaces very stagnant or slow to change. And you alluded to property tech, which has been in its infancy for the last 5 to 10 years. And the Urban Technology Exchange and the Smart Parking Lab are trying to harness that and show proof of concept before a real estate developer manager can make an investment in that technology. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's right. And I think we're no different than other organizations. We get approached virtually every day by somebody with a new technology saying, hey, you should put one of these in every one of your buildings. And of course, we're not going to do that without trying it out. They get a chance to prove their tech. We get a chance to evaluate it, understand how it would interact with other building systems, how tenants would receive it, and what those outcomes would be. We are getting as much out of it as they are in the process. It is a true win-win value proposition. Being more intentional about it, actively looking for ways to innovate in areas that improve the sustainability of the portfolio, improve operating efficiency, and presumably NOI as part of that. At the same time, making properties more attractive to current tenants to retain them and attract the other types of tenants. Because of the density of our portfolio in the city of Detroit and what's happening and growing in Cleveland, it's naturally improving what is happening in these individual cities and how people engage with us, how people come into the city, how they move around, how they experience it. We feel like this kind of both organic innovation and intentional innovation are both uplifting us as an organization, but also uplifting the cities we're in along the way.
I love how you said that the organic and the intentional. And I see that playing out in two ways. One is around how Bedrock is attracting and retaining tenants. So the traditional net operating income of the portfolio. And on the other side, you're speaking to the organic entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial ecosystem in Detroit and how Bedrock is playing a role there in growing talent to hopefully become a tenant in the building someday.
Right.
And I'm curious, are those two pathways to innovation ever in conflict with each other? You know, what you're doing to improve net operating income and what you're doing to build the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
It's a great question, because a team doing innovation and the Smart Parking Lab and Urban Tech Exchange are two of several things we're doing. So I'm not the only one, but we're part of this team that has innovation in its name. And in some ways, we're sitting adjacent to the teams running the day-to-day business. For us to be successful on the innovation side, we need to leverage existing core processes to deploy new things. And you think about people in our building engineering team or our parking operations team trying every day, working very hard to keep the portfolio operating, satisfying our customers and tenants. And here comes the innovation guy who wants them to stop what they're doing and install something that nobody's ever heard of, that's never been tested before, potentially using time at the expense of solving a problem for an existing tenant. That's where the friction happens. It comes down to organizational alignment and priorities and balance, where I need to be respectful that they have a job to do and not get frustrated when it takes me longer to do what I want to do because of it. But at the same time, they understand that leadership has said innovation is important to us and we need to find time to keep moving forward, maybe taking a quantum leap forward with a technology that could be painful at first, but meaningful down the road. That's really where that tension comes. And I think it's a healthy tension because it ensures that you're keeping the existing people happy while attracting other people along the way. So you have to have both. And I think we're pretty good at doing both at the same time.
I would say Detroit's an interesting place to launch these types of innovation platforms, in part because it's such a long legacy of innovation within the mobility sector. I always thought it was interesting that the Smart Parking Lab was the impetus for formalizing innovation at Bedrock. I'm curious. Some real estate developers think that parking is an unloved necessity. Parking in Detroit is a little bit different and has this confluence with mobility and how the city evolved itself. And yeah, the question is really, what about Detroit and mobility with the intersection of real estate has lent itself to being at the forefront of this space?
Yeah, I think there are a number of converging factors and ideas. Of course, as you said, it's the Motor City, the birthplace of the mass production, the automobile, all the innovation that goes along with that. As a result, it's also a city that has not a lot of rapid or mass transit. So you've got a lot of cars moving in and out of the city that need parking when they're here. So parking is probably more paramount in the city of Detroit than other cities. And then in some ways it's serendipity, but then the pandemic hits and then all of a sudden you don't have people coming into the city. Now you've got these assets that are not fully utilized and you need to innovate out of necessity because you got to figure out how to keep these assets utilized. You're looking for other ways to handle parking, or maybe you can have less parking assets because you're optimizing the way you do it and you can convert those parking assets into something else like a data center or something like that. So I think that, as you said, I like to call it mobility plus. Like our industry and our focus is very heavily mobility oriented, but there's all the pluses that go onto that and extend from it. And the parking lab is a manifestation of the plus part of that story.
And now that the mobility industry is being forced to evolve through automation, electrification, and Michigan is doing its best to attract not only venture capital into those spaces, but companies. How does Bedrock's role in the Smart Parking Lab aid in that entrepreneurial ecosystem and also the legacy innovation ecosystem that exists in Detroit?
For those emerging technologies, you brought up a couple, electrification being one of them. That is a vehicle technology dependent on infrastructure. You have to have a place to charge the vehicle. And all the studies show that most charging happens at home overnight. We have a big portfolio of residents, multi-tenant residential properties, or it happens at the workplace, a lot of commercial office space. These parking assets, both for residents and for commercial tenants and for retail customers, we have to have the proper amount of charging infrastructure and deploying it at the proper pace based on the demand that is being driven by the OEMs creating these EVs and putting them in the market. There are other technologies like vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to grid, or V2X generically that depend on the built environment having the ability to communicate with vehicles. Our parking lab is the right asset at the right time where we can innovate on these new technologies. Now we're starting to look upward and consider air mobility, the types of things enabled with drone surfaces and then connecting air mobility to ground mobility. That could also happen in the built environment, whether it be a parking structure or some other type of a building that's got a rooftop that can receive a drone with a package that needs to move it through the building to the ground. We're really forward looking in that regard as well.
That's cool to think of built environment as a true partner in deploying these assets It makes me think of other big real estate developments focused on innovation in Detroit as well. Michigan Central and Ford's investment in that real estate, and then Tech Town and its relationship with Wayne State University. Can you speak to how these different epicenters for innovation complement or maybe compete with each other as you're
Yeah.
pursuing innovative partnerships?
It's the classic use of the term co-opetition. In some ways, we are competing to attract the brightest, most exciting startups into our individual portfolios. But at the same time, we're also collaborating together to ensure that Detroit lands that startup. And it doesn't matter which one of our platforms they enter as long as we capture them. We'll have plenty of time down the road to compete for their real estate needs. But if they don't come here and get started, then we won't have that opportunity. We can cite several cases where we're working together. One platform doesn't have what a startup needs, so they refer them to the other platform and somebody else can help them out. Our proudest moments at the Smart Parking Lab are when we take a company like It's Electric, who their first ever charging infrastructure deployment prototype was in our parking lab. They did so well that now they've got the means and the need to establish a presence at New Lab, which is one of the other platforms that Michigan Central has launched. So we don't look at that as competition. We look at that as pride. Like, we helped them scale to the point where they wanted and needed a presence in Detroit at New Lab. So we count that as a victory for both of us.
In that case, it seems that you're convening these different partners to support technologies as they are in their nascent stage and as they begin to scale. What other roles does Bedrock play beyond convener that aid these companies in their development to scale and commercial deployment?
As I mentioned earlier, we're not making direct investments in these companies, but we can provide capital and portfolio for deployments. Even though we have dedicated space at the Smart Parking Lab or at the Urban Tech Exchange, anywhere in our portfolio, we could help a startup deploy something. So I think that's an asset, 100 buildings strong in Detroit, where we have capability to help a startup. I think it's the density of our portfolio where we have opportunities to try things because of that density that others don't. So that's unique. I think that our voice in the city with policymakers and philanthropic entities, where we can bring other resources that are, non-dilutive, non-capital resources to help the startup scale. So we have that voice. And then I think we do have the opportunity to scale. If somebody is successful here in a parking technology, we've got almost 20 parking structures that we can deploy it in. We've got 100 buildings. If it works in one building, it could scale. So we have both the desire to help in initial deployment and the ability to help somebody scale long-term down the road.
It seems like Bedrock might be able to do this all by themselves, but from our work together, I know
Yeah.
that's not the case. I'm assuming that all these partners also have their own objectives they're trying to achieve. I don't know how Bedrock's goals match up with these other goals that the state, city, private entities, universities have. And I was hoping you could sort of speak to that. Besides business operational success and the growth of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, what are some other goals that the UTX, the Urban Technology Exchange, and the Detroit Smart Parking Lab are trying to achieve through the identification, scale, and eventual commercial deployment of their tech?
I think each of the stakeholders has their own performance metrics, strategic goals and objectives, and sometimes they're not aligned. Many times they are aligned around sustainability. How do we have a more sustainable and equitable city for our residents and the people that are visiting? How do we help people move around more effectively as they're going about their day-to-day lives, whether it's related to home life, work life, or entertainment? How do we create opportunity for the residents to play in these technologies, both from an end user, but maybe even as an employer? We have a project going at the Urban Tech Exchange where we're working with the city of Detroit and the Detroit People Mover, one of our transit providers downtown, who use a digital model Bedrock has created of the downtown central business district to help understand how people are going to leverage public transit to move in and out of the new Hudson's development, which is right in the center of downtown. That's going to bring 10,000 people to a specific location. Hasn't had anybody of that magnitude coming for the last 20 years. Like, how are we going to move people around? This is an example of where our platform and the technologies that we're deploying could create a meaningful impact on how people move about. The residents of these properties or the guests that are coming to the entertainment component, but the service workers that are coming in and out, a lot of them coming from the neighborhoods, how are they going to move in and around, and how are they going to be able to afford to find parking that's close by, safe to park and move into the city? So we want to find those kinds of solutions where it starts with a collaboration with a very important end goal, and then we bring technology behind it to find a way to enable it.
I like that. It probably takes a lot of alignment at the beginning of setting up the DSPL or the UTX. And we haven't had a chance to talk about too many examples. I like the one about the Detroit People Mover and even the drone technology we referenced earlier. Can you speak specifically about a technology at either of the labs that you're really excited about and that you see potential for other real estate developers also feeling they can find value in?
I think for the parking lab, there is a set of charging infrastructure technologies that offer potential to deploy charging infrastructure without a high impact to that built environment or without a lot of cost. One of them is one that I referenced earlier. It's electric, where they have a novel model of deploying the charging infrastructure at the curbside and leveraging power from the residents or business across the curb. Really interesting commercial model that they're working through with both property owners and the utility companies. That's one. Another one where they're retrofitting street lamps and light posts on parking garages to retrofit them with charging infrastructure. And then a third one is a robot that will, instead of the car driving to the charging infrastructure, the car parks normally, and then the robot drives to the vehicle and charges the vehicle in its parking space and then moves on. So you have a whole different equation for the type, amount, and cost of infrastructure that you have to deploy to enable charging. The opportunities for developers to maybe even create a new asset class of a rooftop to monetize their rooftops for these types of delivery services. There are a number of big names that are out there testing retail drone delivery services, but we really want to focus on what that looks like in a dense urban environment. A lot of the testing happening now, suburban or even more remote. At the Urban Tech Exchange, I mentioned one use case of the digital model that we've built, but I think the example that gives of how you can take the digital realm and deploy design interventions where you can have somebody go into the virtual world and experience a different design in the built environment or in placemaking before you actually create it, and you can measure their reactions to those things virtually. It's going to dramatically speed up the way that we do things and ensure the effectiveness of those types of solutions. And then we got a number of technologies around energy demand management. How does the building interface with the utility to make that property more sustainable?
It is easier for an individual or even a firm or a building to deploy a discrete technology. There's also this other side of the coin where you're talking about drone deployments in urban environments, curbside charging, and working with utilities that necessitate a government partner or a quasi-government partner because you're working in the public space. There's been this overarching narrative around government being slow to implement change, and that a lot of process is backlogging the types of innovation outcome that private sector, but also communities are hungry for. What are some of the things Detroit is doing well and other cities could replicate to help stakeholders like Bedrock move faster towards outcomes that everybody wants?
We've had a great opportunity here with a multi-term governor and a multi-term mayor that have had an aligned vision. They've deployed resources that we've been able to consistently work with over a number of years to create programs and methodologies and drive outcomes that have created this flywheel effect where they're building off of each other as they go. I think you have to be an active player as well. We demonstrate our commitment by bringing our own resources and funding to contribute to what the public entities here, the city and state, have been able to do as well. So it's not just asking somebody to fund what we're trying to do. We're co-funding it with them. That makes it a lot easier when there's a high match from the private side. Also letting those entities know that you're open to using your assets to test an idea that they might be bringing from somewhere else. We have a lot of capabilities and assets that can engage across the technology spectrum. And we need to be willing to say yes when they reach out and ask us to do it. I think that is also contributive to that flywheel effect
Hmm.
where you've got a bunch of people looking and moving in the same direction.
Can you talk about the Transportation Innovation Zone as the actualization of these investments from different stakeholders to facilitate innovation?
Yeah, it's a really great example. There's a neighborhood here in Detroit, one of the oldest neighborhoods called Corktown, and there was a large investment being made from Ford Motor Company in an iconic property there called Michigan Central. The city saw this coming and investments that others like Bedrock were making in this neighborhood, and they established what's called a transportation innovation zone, which has literal boundaries. The city's chief innovation officer went to city council and got authorization to award special permits to enable technology deployments that are mobility related in that innovation zone. That basically speeds things up because this innovation office can do its own permitting within that zone to a limit, of course, but it makes it very attractive for startups to come and try to test new things because a lot of the bureaucracy that comes with city government is bypassed through this special permitting process. I think it's a wonderful example of what the city of Detroit has done. And then on top of that, the state came in and layered an aerial innovation region where
Mm.
there's a mechanism, structure, and some funding to facilitate testing of air mobility techniques on top of these transportation innovation zones. In one area, you've got the city and state playing together, and you've got air mobility and ground mobility playing together. We're super excited about the outcomes that are going to be generated from that structure.
That's very cool. I do want you to sort of take a look at where Detroit and the mobility and built environment space has been and evolved over the last 5 to 10 years. I know you've been in this space for decades and project forward. What are you excited about? Where do you see innovation in the built environment going? And where should we sort of keep our eye?
I think the areas that will prove to drive very compelling outcomes and be able to survive the noise of the day are things around multimodal hubs, where you've got multiple forms of transportation and logistics coming together. And within those, the potential for micro logistics centers to emerge as well. What's happening with logistics is an irreversible trend. We're all used to getting things on demand when we need it, being able to leverage existing city assets to create these multimodal and micro logistics hubs. I think that's going to be one. I think dynamic curbside. And then I think this general idea of energy demand management, being able to have your properties interact with the utilities and manage loads and drive behaviors by providing capabilities that are convenient to the end user will continue to emerge around energy demand management.
Bedrock is able to play in all these spaces because of all of the great assets it has. And you spoke to that earlier. And if someone's listening to this and they only have a few buildings in their portfolio or their portfolio is not dense, what are ways that they can partake in what Bedrock is doing at the DSPL and UTX, or that they could parallel within their own portfolio? What have you learned from starting these two ventures that could help other real estate developers?
The primary notion, which I don't know that I've even mentioned yet, you know this, but they're open innovation platforms. We intentionally designed these platforms to enable and encourage other developers to come and see what we're doing. So it's open doors. The first thing I would say is anybody that's out there that's interested, please reach out because we would welcome the chance to show you what we're doing. It's designed to be that way. The plethora of smart building technologies that are out there, there is something for everyone. You don't have to have a huge portfolio. If you are commercial office space, there are so many opportunities to improve the way that property operates. A tenant engages with it. You don't have to have a huge amount of space. One of the key enablers for us is a building management system platform, which we're excited to work with Code Labs across our portfolio. Having that building have a brain where they can see the impacts from these various discrete deployments across the building or in the portfolio, that's super critical as well. There's no shortage of things to try that are low friction, easy to deploy, high impact, and then you start getting this network effect of them, the results of each of them compounding with each other. So you just got to be willing to try those new things in a sensible way, but with a tiny little bit of risk associated with it as well.
Thanks for tuning in to Building Better Cities. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to hit subscribe so you never miss another episode. And if you could help spread the word by sharing with someone, it would mean so much to us. To learn more about our work, check out buildingbettercities.com. We're excited to keep the conversation going. So until next time, let's keep building better cities together.